The Emperor John's by Eugene. Today is the last session on Eugene, the Emperor John's. We are discussing the significance of the tom-tom initially. Thereafter, we will discuss some other important topics. And with today's lecture, we will wind up our discussion of Eugene, the Emperor John's. So initially, we discussed the importance of the tom-tom in the play The Emperor John's. We know that Eugene, as a dramatist, started a lot of experiments in US theater, and this play is noted for the blending of expressionism and realism. And one of the techniques to make expressionism all the more effective is the use of sound and light end. Now we have, of course, tom-tom. Tom-tom is the sound, and we are discussing the importance of the tom-tom in The Emperor John's of Eugene. The expressionistic dramatists were fond of using sound and lighting effects to reveal the states of mind of their characters. O'Neill also attached great importance to sound effects and made them structural parts of his plays. He once said that the primary difference between his plays and those of his contemporaries was that he always wrote primarily by ear for the ear, that most of his plays had the definite structural quality of a musical composition. In The Emperor John's also, throughout the 6 forest scenes, we hear a number of sounds. For example, the sounds of the great forests, the clicking sound, the sounds of the prison guard, the witch doctor's croon, and the tom-tom sound. The different sound effects in The Emperor John's has contributed incomparably to the success. Now let us look at the different sound effects in the play The Emperor John's. Throughout the 6 forest scenes, we hear a number of sounds. In scene 2, we have the fateful sounds of the great forests, broken only by the moaning of the wind and the mocking laughter like a rustling of leaves of the little farmless fields. The description of these sounds is an adequate expression of John's primitive, superstitious nature under the pressure of guilt-ridden fears. Similarly, the clicking sound in scene 3 is such as can easily be mistaken for a realistic forest sound. For we do not immediately see Jeff and cannot therefore at once identify the sound as coming from his throwing of the dice. We thus go through precisely the same mental process as does John's a little later, and must, along with him, admit that what is hallucinatory is also paradoxically what is real. In scenes 4 and 5, the convicts move silently. The prison guard cracks his whip noiselessly. The planters and dandies make their remarks in silence, and the auctioneer's description of John's as one of the slaves is made in dumb show. In the last 2 visions, the horns are not only seen but are also heard, and they are heard as plaintive human beings. John's joins them in their wail, which expresses suffering and which reaches an unbearably acute pitch until it is followed by the silence of death. John's fate finds a verbal expression in these sounds, and he is now completely at one with his hallucinatory ghosts. Hi Ranjit, good evening. Please tell your friends also to join. Thanks a lot for joining. Please tell others, inform Amar, Dheeraj, and all other classmates. Of course, we are discussing some of the very important topics from the play The Emperor Jones. Thanks for joining. Ranjit, please inform everybody. So, Jones joins them in their wail, which expresses suffering and which reaches an unbearably acute pitch until it is followed by the silence of death. John's fate finds a verbal expression in these sounds, and he is now completely at one with his hallucinatory ghosts, whose sounds are deserted. We are discussing sounds in the play The Emperor Jones. As I said in the beginning, sounds contribute to the effect of expressionism, and we are discussing the tom-tom sound in the play The Emperor Jones. At the end of it, we begin to hear the beat of tom-tom, which continues and slowly accelerates to the end of the play. John sets off confidently for the forest, which he will reach at sunset. The play is arranged in 8 scenes. The first and the last are normal, realistic scenes, and they have normal dialogue and very realistic action. The intervening 6 consists of a monologue by Jones, what is known as interior monologue, which is one of the aspects of psychological plays. The only other sounds being those of the tom-tom of John's tom-tom and of John's revolver and the firing sounds of the revolver. And of course, this gun contains 6 bullets, 5 of lead and 1 of silver. He has convinced his subjects that only a silver bullet can kill him. He knows rationally that this is nonsense, yet he has this silver bullet for himself in case anything goes wrong with his plan. If he is to die, he will live up to his legend. In the 6 central scenes, we see him gradually losing self-confidence, step by step, returning to the condition of a Negro of the African interior at the time when his people came from there, and losing, along with his self-confidence, his clothes and his treasured bullets. The patterning of the scenes is very deliberate and can be briefly outlined. Scene 2, it is of course the encounter between John's and little formless fears and the firing of the first bullet. Scene 3 is of course 9 p.m. John's just encounters the ghost of Jeff, and he fires at Jeff and he loses the second bullet. Scene 4 is 11 p.m. He sees his fellow prisoners, and of course he fires at the prison guard. And scene 5 is, of course, he finds himself in a slave market and he is just firing at the auctioneer. Then scene 6 is, of course, he is on a slave ship. Of course, before that, he has already fired the planter as also. And now we come to scene 7, in which he sees, he is in, of course, Africa. He is in Congo, and he encounters the witch doctor. He encounters the crocodile god, and he has to fire the last silver bullet. Okay, so we have an interesting use of, a very interesting use of sound in this play. And of course, the tom-tom is becoming louder, quicker, nearer. The sound of ghosts and apparitions and people just running. And of course, we have the sound of the bullets fired. So an interesting complexity is to be found in the manner of John's distraction. Alone in the forest, he loses his veneer of a cheap civilization and is destroyed by memory and the fear it brings. But the magic of tom-tom has helped to induce panic, and he is killed by the silver bullet the Negroes had labored all night to make. Their motive is both instances was, of course, superstitious, but the charms ironically work. Further, in a way, he triumphs. He gets the silver bullet, death, which preserves his legend and which he himself was prepared to submit to in case of necessity. Thus, the supernatural beliefs have a psychological effect and ultimately a material effect which both secures John's status and entrenches the beliefs. And now, O'Neill has once again made extreme demands on the theatre. The play is short, but the actor who plays Johns has an almost insupportable burden during the central six scenes, which are expressionistic. The scene designer is required to produce six elaborate settings which must convey to the audience a simulacrum of John's response to them. The mute visions involve a large number, especially in the spectators of the slave auction in scene fifth. It's not surprising that the play has been frequently acted, and one must admit that frequent acting would not be like to make the play appear much more impressive. It is ingenious, and the ending, as we have seen, has a complete suggestiveness, but it remains a diagram of regression. Once perceived, it has no more to offer. Still, as a play everyone ought to see once, it needs no apology. So the Provincetown players began their new season in McDougall Street last week with the impetus of a new play by them as yet unbridled. Eugene O'Neill, an extraordinary, striking, and dramatic study of panic fear, which is called The Emperor John's. It reinforces the impression that for strength and originality, he has no rival among American writers for the stage, though his new play of his is so clumsily produced that its presentation consists largely of long, unventilated intermissions interspersed with fragmentary scenes. It weaves a most potent spell thanks partly to the admirable playing of Charles S. Gilpin in a title role so predominant that the play is little more than a dramatic monologue. Is an uncommonly powerful and imaginative performance, in several respects unsurpassed this season in New York. Mr. Gilpin is a Negro. So this is a wonderful review of the play when it was just performed in New York, and the role of Emperor Jones enacted by Charles S. Gilpin. Of course, Gilpin, as we understand and read in the review, is a Negro. Now, with that, we come to the end of the discussion of the significance of Tom Tom. Now we move on to the discussion of yet another very important general topic, and that topic is the evolution of expressionistic drama in America. The topic we discuss next is the evolution of expressionistic drama in United States of America, or rather, we can say that expressionism is in fact a protest against the realistic, conventional, traditional kind of theater and drama, and expressionistic drama is of course a protest drama. It's in fact a protest against the traditional realistic drama of the United States of America, and this can even be a topic like maybe discuss the theme of the playwrights of protest in America, and we are discussing that topic, that is the evolution of expressionistic drama in United States of America, or of course the playwrights of protest in America. So let us start. The term expressionism means expression of inner reality through outer symbols. Expressionism is the expression of inner reality through outer symbols. In other words, subordination of realism to expressionism of inner experience. As a dramatic movement, expressionism began in 1916 and continued to flourish in Europe until around 1924. O'Neill imported expressionism from Germany. Strindberg was the father of expressionistic drama. And expressionism in drama is what stream of consciousness in fiction. It is the expression of the dream state, formlessness, disorder, protest are the major features of expressionism. Traditional story element and plot construction are rejected in favor of psychological reality. Characters are mere symbolic types. There is no traditional division of drama into acts. Clock time is broken. There is a fusion of the present, future, and past. Described by some critics as the drama of disorder, this dramatic technique seeks to represent concretely on the stage what happens inside a character's mind in response to external stimuli. The objective world is presented through the narrow compass of the protagonist's vision and is completely subjective, even deliberately distorted. The expressionists were concerned with man versus machine, and with the class struggle, their characters tend to be types, their designs stylized, and their scenes short. Mechanical gestures and identical repetitive stage directions, broken sentences, intensely personal dialogue, elliptical telegram like style, repetition of rhythm as a powerful factor in making anything expressive as a means of control over emotions and exploitation of the stage devices and costumes and masks, etc., are some of the essential features of an expressionistic drama. There is an influence of motion pictures on expressionistic drama. The dramatist writes as one who protests against family or society. Now we have to understand yet another fact that expressionism or expressionistic drama is a protest against realism and naturalism. And hence we can say that expressionistic drama in United States of America is of course a protest drama. Now the visual impetus of the new movement was by no means the only revolt from realism the modern theater was to see. There were playwrights. There were playwrights too who soon turned their backs on the notebook psychology, for which Nietzsche said it stood, and shared his contempt for its constant spying on reality and its lying in the dust before trivial facts. They were men who were neither satisfied with the habitual forms of realism nor contented with the basic aims which motivated it. Men who rebelled against its preordained concern with appearances and hated the technical cliches through which it spoke. They felt that Zola's complaint against arrangement which inspired the naturalists had but little influence on the realists who came after him because they had reverted without a struggle to the well-made play in form that was but slightly altered. They fretted too under the confinement of the conventional play of 3 or 4 acts, lodging their complaints, however, not against arrangement in general, but the particular kind of arrangement it necessitated. Unlike Zola's, Their criticism sprang from a conviction that the ordinary realistic play was an art, a form which was lacking in true selection, real truth, or opportunities above the uh, humdrum. The playwrights, the so-called expressionistic playwrights, who for convenience were later to be labeled expressionists, wanted to do more than contemplate the surface of things. They sought for deeper conflicts than those granted by the good old external situations of the well made plays, even as treated by the realists. They looked for a freer means of presentation and a wider range of narrative than their restricted formula afforded. They wanted to see not the surface alone, but beneath the surface too. It was Stanislavski who said, realism ends where the superconscious begins. And the superconscious was the object of their quest. They hoped to enjoy something of that something of that sense of omniscience, which is the usual province of the novelist, to exercise his freedom in selecting one character through which to see event and to write with a point of view which was impossible when the fourth wall was removed and a mere slice of life revealed. They wanted to look within their characters, treat them subjectively, tap their stream of consciousness if need be, penetrate into their innermost beings, and lay bare their dreams, their inhibitions, and hidden workings of their minds, reactions, and mental states, which could not be included in the external observation of the camera. In short, they sought the eye of the X-ray instead of the camera. In pursuing their aims, they did not want to concentrate on one event, but on a series of events, pivotal revelatory moments which were free of claptrap and innocent of padding moments which marched bravely into essence of the event, which determined character or registered growth or retrogression. Crucial moments of crisis rather than half hours of preparation. They sought biographies, or at least partial biographies, rather than single instances. Like the designers, they were not afraid of symbols. Unlike the designers, they too employed suggestion rather than representation. Frequently, they forswore particularized characters tagged with definite names. In their place, they chose, as the old morality plays had chosen, a man, a woman, any man, any woman, every man, every woman, and set them against the background of their time. Types, not individuals, frightened with a full charge of symbolism. Occasionally, they even dispensed with types, replacing them by groups, sections of the community, choruses caught at moment of revolt, or seen as victims of the machine age which surrounded them. If, however, they pursued individualized characters, they did so with an interest which centered in a series of events rather than a single arbitrary quandary. As their concern frequently was not the outer world at all, but the inner life of the mind and the spirit, they availed themselves of the discoveries and the language of the newer psychologists, and particularly the psychoanalysts and psychiatrists who had appeared since the turn of the 20th century. Just as Darwin and the budding scientific spirit had anticipated in the world of thought, a tendency which was to enter the playhouse some 20 years later under the name of naturalism. So Freud and Jung were the trailblazers of the expressionistic playwrights, dramatists, by the way, who first became marked enough in their tendencies to win a label some 20 years after Freud had made his earliest exploration in dreams, hysteria, and the subconscious. Good evening, Amar. Hope you are doing good. Thanks a lot for joining, Amarnath. Now, in fact, we are discussing the expressionistic dramatists. We are also just looking at what is called the protest drama. Protest drama is a drama which is against realism and naturalism. So, good evening to all the 60 plus people online. Thanks a lot for listening. And I just request you to continue your support. Please like. If you find my lectures useful, of course, discussions useful, you can just like and comment and continue to watch and continue to support me and my channel. Okay, thanks a lot for joining. Now we are discussing, of course, what is protest drama. Protest drama is expressionistic drama. Protest drama or expressionistic drama is a drama against realism, against naturalism. And it is concerned with the mind. It is concerned with the inner reality. It is concerned with the what is called the subconscious and the unconscious, right? So we know that, the psychologists, Hi, Amar. Thank you for your message. I'll continue. In fact, I'm just discussing how Eugene O'Neill was influenced by psychologists like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, and it is under the influence of the interpretations of the mind of Jung and Sigmund Freud that he became an expressionistic dramatist. Okay, so Freud and Jung were the trailblazers of the expressionistic playwrights, dramatists, by the way, who first became marked enough in their tendencies to win label some 20 years after Freud had made his earliest exploration in dreams, hysteria, and the subconscious. Now, of course, we are just moving forward to the discussion of expressionism on theater, expressionism in drama. What are the techniques adopted by the dramatists, especially the expressionistic dramatists who are revolting against realism, revolting against naturalism. They just want to make their drama, the expressionistic drama, the psychological drama, all the more effective. So in order to make the drama all the more effective, in order to represent the psyche, the subconscious and the unconscious of the characters, in order to represent the collective unconscious of the characters, they adopt a number of techniques. And we are discussing those techniques adopted by playwrights like Eugene O'Neill, especially Eugene O'Neill, because we are discussing the Emperor Jones. We are discussing, of course, the same expressionistic technique we can see in the hairy ape as well. So we are looking at the techniques used by Eugene O'Neill and other expressionistic playwrights like Strindberg to make expressionistic plays very, very effective. So in the purely technical matters of play making, these insurgent dramatists, the expressionists, found much to condemn in the customary form of the realistic play, that pretended to realism. They felt with a warrantable conviction that its regulation acts of a certain fixed and inviolable length were external divisions which are less than nothing to do with the treatment required by the subject at hand. To them, these acts of traditional length were the epitome of the anti-realistic, because, for one thing, it was necessary to place in rooms in which all the characters might logically assemble at a logical hour. and for another, because the length of the act was usually much more than its main situation needed or could stand. Accordingly, they objected to the manner in which the well-made plays were padded to fill given subplots, minor characters, comic relief, and a lesser love interests, which were as artificial as they were unimportant and distracting. The expressionist playwrights looked with disfavor upon the patient preparation of such plays, the realistic plays. To them, this habit of devoting one act to exposition, another one or two acts to realizing the complication. Okay, here we have to remember the Freytagian concept of the pyramidical structure of tragedies. Okay, where you have exposition, rather we have the initial incident, rising action, crisis, then we have the falling action, denouement, catastrophe. Okay, so that is the traditional structure of tragedy. But expressionist playwrights, they are just challenging such a, questioning such a pattern. So usually built around one big scene or situation. Realistic plays had none of the sweep of life, its pace, its confusion, its mad, unfaltering on rush, and gave to their thinking none of the kaleidoscopic sequence of events or the true complexities of character. As the expressionists saw them, they took into account only what men said, never what they left unsaid, and were accordingly eternally preoccupied with surfaces and appearances. This is the demerit of realistic plays, according to the expressionists. They were preoccupied with surfaces and appearances. They were not concerned with the psyche, the mind. Expressionists, dramatists, on the other side, are concerned with the mind, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious. So also the collective unconscious, that is, of course, the subconscious and unconscious of people who lived before us, our ancestors, our forefathers, the very humanity, the subconscious and the unconscious of the humanity. So whatever is in the subconscious of our ancestors creeps into our own psyche. That's what we see in the Emperor Johns. They included too many characters to let any one of them be fully revealed or honestly observed. Realistic drama. In realistic drama, say for example, look at Shakespearean drama, like we have the Tempest, we have of course the King Lear, or any other, even Macbeth or Hamlet, or any of the plays of William Shakespeare. We can see too many characters. Okay, normal spectators or ordinary readers find difficulty in remembering all the names of the characters, right? So they included realistic, naturalistic plays, included too many characters to let any one of them be fully revealed or honestly observed. But we cannot just blame, of course, all the Shakespeare plays, but maybe we can say that this happens in the case of some other plays, right? Because we admire the heroes of Shakespeare. We, of course, feel pity and fear for Othello. Similarly, for Lear, Hamlet, and Macbeth. So also for some of the other characters in these plays. So we cannot just underestimate all realistic plays this way. But of course, expressionist plays have their own merits and wonderful, excellent effects. So the very dialogue they employed, the very dialogue they employed was a matter of superficial epigrams or trivial small talk. Realistic plays, artificially manufactured and polished by stylists, thrust down the throats of characters rather than rather than springing naturally to their lips. Okay, maybe when you look at the dialogues of Macbeth, like life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Or maybe you have right Hamlet, right? To be or not to be, that's the question. Whether it's noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, right? It's sheer poetry, and you just wonder how could these military officers like Macbeth, Hamlet, etc. Okay, use such kind of wonderful poetry. This is the poetry of William Shakespeare, right? But this is the kind of language we have in realistic plays, and expressionistic playwrights are questioning realistic plays, and they just point at the demerits of the realistic naturalistic plays. Okay, so the very dialogue they employed was a matter of superficial epigrams or trivial small talk, artificially manufactured and polished by stylists, thrust down the throats of characters rather than springing naturally to their lips. Realistic plays, it was neither self-searching nor completely unveiling, because it was used to show not the dual nature of the inner man, but that single aspect of the outer man which the other characters and audience were allowed to hear. It was moreover unfitted to the needs of that new center conflict these insurgent playwrights has found, for they were not conflict these insurgent playwrights had found. They were not satisfied with the old sources of action. They, like their times, had stumbled upon new ones. They did not want to present mankind grappling with outside forces. Rather, they sought to dramatize his struggle with himself. And for this, the old dialogue was patently inadequate. And now we are just uh, looking at expressionistic playwrights, expressionists, dramatists, and of course the kind of Shakespearean or Elizabethan drama. We are comparing Elizabethan drama and Shakespearean drama with the expressionist dramatists. Okay, so the characteristics of the Elizabethan drama and the difference of the expressionist dramas or dramatists. In their search for freedom, the expressionists turn consciously or unconsciously to the models of the Elizabethans, the models the Elizabethans afforded. Shakespeare and his contemporaries had felt no need for lengthy scenes that outstayed their dramatic necessity. They had spun their dramas on stage bare of details but rich in suggestion, and told them by means of a quickly unfolding series caught only at their moments of fullest need and most vigorous meaning. Their plays had been active, wasting no time on such indirections as cover scenes or concealed exposition, which are tricks that modern dramatists have brought to a laborious perfection. Instead, they had marched to their points and their conclusions with a superb freedom. No unities had stood in their way, nor had they bowed to any of the academic niceties which sapped the vitality of the French classicists. Their stage was the world, and their scripts were nomads traveling at will to its farthest corners, jumping from Rome to Alexandria to Egypt. Accordingly, in the breathless pace of Dr. Faustus or an Antony and Cleopatra, the expressionists found a form suited to their needs. They did not borrow it wholesale, however, but put it to a new use. For where the Elizabethans had developed a technique which was hospitable to their vital, sprawling yarns, the expressionists looked for one which would give them psychological freedom of a similar kind. Now, of course, we understand that. Eugene O'Neill, he became, in fact, he experimented with theater. And it is his experimentation with theater that led to, of course, expressionism. And in his experimentation with theatrical techniques and theatrical performance, we understand that he was influenced by motion pictures or films. And expressionistic plays have a lot of influence, right? Expressionistic plays are influenced by motion pictures that we see in this play as well, that is the Emperor Jones as well. Just like in film, you have a lot of scenic descriptions, background, sound, use of light and all. Let us just discuss all that right now here. So the influence of motion pictures on expressionists, dramatists, and drama. We discuss that right now. Okay. So undoubtedly, the expressionists were as much influenced by the motion pictures as they were by the novelists, the psychoanalysts, or, for that matter, the Elizabethans. The camera's eye was a roving eye, able to look at its characters only when they were doing something, and then turn with a prompt impatience to the next, even as soon as the first was over. It was never stationary. More than that, it was constantly switching to fresh and arresting points. Steadily trained as it was, not moments of realized conflict, it possessed a ubiquity of which even the Elizabethans had never dreamed. But ubiquity was not its only claim to envy, because it was also prepared to change its focus at will, shifting from long shots to close ups with a suppleness which, to say the least, must have offered an inviting to uh, model of dramatists who had for several generations been subjected to the unvarying form of the three or four act play. Be that as it may, the expressionist appeared prepared, as the critic Rosamund Gilder said, to let off his Gatling gun of experiences, a volley of scenes in rapid succession, each one complete, climactic, independent, connected only by the thread of life itself, the life of the human being whose individual and typical experience it unfolded. He was ready and anxious to use both the aside and the soliloquy, for having cast the ordinary tenets of realism to the wind, he sought both of these once despised devices as the simplest means of reaching the inner process of his principal characters. As a literary form, the plays he wrote were dramas stripped to its most basic essence, just as the setting of the new movement were scenery stripped to its most basic essence. Certainly, as dramatic form, this came nearest to the ideals of the directors and designers who, faced with the endless living room and kitchens of photographic realism, had been forced to seek opportunities equal to their aims in the romantic drama of the past. In the stream of this expressionistic protest, the leaders of the new movement and the modern playwrights, who had been pursuing simultaneous but separate courses, approached the closest union the contemporary theater has seen, because in it, the theater of the eyes, the new movement had inspired, and the result was that theater of the mind's eye, which was to be known as expressionism. So, what is expressionism? Expressionistic drama, expressionistic theater. Expressionistic theater is theater of the mind's eye. Very simple. It's a theater of the mind's eye. It's the theater that shows what's in the mind of the characters. Now, okay, let us discuss. We know that expressionist plays are protest plays, plays protesting against realism and naturalism. And okay, let us just look at the individual protest of the expressionist dramatists. Though the playwrights using its technique have won a common title, that is expressionists, they have but rarely been consolidated into a group or school. In spite of certain similarities in methods of attack, and above all, in the common desire for experimentation which has characterized their work, the world over, the protest of the expressionists has been largely individual. It's not united. Frequently, in fact, the tag of expressionism has been loosely and incorrectly used as a synonym for any kind of definite experiment in playwriting or any kind of anti realistic stunt in redaction. At its best, it has resulted not half so much from a studious or self conscious preoccupation with external modes as form a spontaneous and internal relationship between form and content. In Europe and America, it has been the weapon of men who were discontented with the cliches of everyday prayer writing and the salvation of those who have had something to say which could not be said in the traditional way. At its worst, it has been the refuse of imitators who have had nothing to say and who have had the bad judgment to turn to a form which demands, above all others, not only something to say, but beneath it, as Ludwig Lewischon has pointed out, a fundamental brain work, thinking as resilient as steel and as clear cut as a gate. Now, we are discussing, of course, we know what expressionism, and we know that expressionism is drama of the mind's eye. Now, we are just going to look at the very origin of expressionism in drama uh, in detail. Okay, so birth and origin of expressionism is the next subtopic we discuss. We are discussing, of course, expressionistic drama, protest drama, Eugene O'Neill as an expressionist dramatist. So this subtopic we are discussing the birth and origin of expressionism. In fact, to find the first manifestation of expressionism is difficult beyond possibility because expressionism, like all artistic developments, is so inseparable. Because expressionism linked with what preceded it both in and out of the theater, in the arts and in living, in the sciences and in thought, that there is no single moment nor any single instance which marks its birth. In an abstract way and as an origin outside the playhouses, Nietzsche may be taken as its courtier, the Nietzsche of Thus Spake Zarathustra, that magnificent soliloquy of Protestant self probing, which in its thinking, its questioning, and its prophetic note has so much in common with what the so called expressionists were to do later. Inside the theater, the first foreshadowing may possibly be seen in the symbolism of Ibsen's later plays in Little Eyolf, When We Dead Awaken, and The Master Builder. So the early uh, instances or early signs of expressionism we find in the place of Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen. Okay, though in Ibsen's own reaction to such a statement raises an interesting conjecture. In any case, it was of the speech of Hilda and Solness in The Master Builder that Master Link said, it resembles nothing we have ever heard, blending as it does in one expression both the inner and the outer dialogue. So, expressionism is the expression of the inner and the outer dialogue. Strindberg was, however, first practitioner of the newer aims to cast the unmistakable shadow of his influence over those who were to follow him. So we have, the very sparks of the so-called SPARK, sparks, flames of expressionism in Nietzsche. We have it in, of course, Henrik Ibsen. We have it in Strindberg as well. Now, let us just continue. It was oddly enough, as Donald Clive Stewart has indicated, in the development of dramatic art, is Strindberg who, after the Inferno years, had awakened, as he himself said, to find Maeterlinck again, and then he seemed like a new land and a new era. It was Maeterlinck, the mystic and the symbolist, who captured his imagination. The Maeterlinck who had stated his famous theory of inactive drama, his conviction that motionless old man who gives an unconscious ear to all the eternal laws that reign about his house, motionless as he is, in reality, a deeper, more human, and more universal life than the lower who strangles his mistress, the captain who conquers in battle, or the husband who avenges his honor. It was, in short, the Maeterlinck who had spurned the machine-made patterns of the drama and formulated a new conception of the dramatic, to whom Strindberg turned, finding a kinship in his mysticism, admiring his flights from the factual, his mood dramas, his unreality. Now we are discussing the beginnings of the expressionistic tendency. That is, okay, which all place do we find? Do we have some of the aspects of expressionism? Beginnings of the expressionistic tendency. Okay, so just when Europe was witnessing a rebirth of Romanticism in the place of Rostand, D'Annunzio, Benelli, Stephen Phillips, and von Habston-Mansthal, the beginnings of expressionistic tendency were making themselves felt. Strindberg, who had been a symbolist in Lucky Pierre, was in the dream play The Spook Sonata, the two parts of The Dance of Life, and the three parts of Towards Damascus, blazing new dramatic trails and abandoning naturalism. Furthermore, and this was particularly important in the light of what followed, he was particularly turning to the dream as a theatrical device suited to his new aims. It was not, of course, the hoary old dream trick which so many plays had made familiar. No longer did a leading character who was sipping a whiskey and soda before a roaring fire in a wainscoted room doze off at the end of the first act into a sleep which found him a night at a round table in the second and awake in the third. The dream was now to be used not as a means for such Connecticut Yankee characters, but as a legitimate springboard to the unedited, uninhibited wanderings of the mind. It was now to become psychological instead of fairy tale device. Strindberg and the Wedekind of Erdgeist, Pandora's box, and the awakening of spring, with his earth spirit, his impatience with an overly literary world, and his frank delineation of passion and sex were the precursors. In Russia, and rave and every no followed expressionism. And rave with such symbolic fable of the cycle of existence as the life of man, or much later such reaching for philosophical truth as he who gets slapped, or the waltz of the dogs. Every no with the idea of monodrama, and such plays as the theater of the soul, or such a mass comedy of appearances and illusion as the chief thing. So in all these plays of the Russians or the Europeans, we find the early flames or instances of expressionism. Now we have to look at the contribution of German playwrights to expressionist drama. It was in Germany, however, and particularly in the Germany of war and post-war days, that expressionism assumed the staccato scene sequence, which is usually associated with its name. The works of Kaiser, Toller, and Hassenclaver offer new examples of construction more marked in their tendencies and aggressive in their individuality than the first steps of foreigners had been. Definite enough, in fact, to warrant the tag which their common characteristics won for them. They came as dramas of disillusionment, of social unrest, had tormented mortals, depending as a rule on only a few indicative properties and outcuts picked out by sharps of sight, which starved the darkness of stages surrounded by black curtains. Their simple production demands were no doubt conveniently adapted to the financial capacities of an impoverished Germany. But it must not be supposed that they were only the children of poverty. Instead, they were the offspring of human and artistic discontent, born of rich zest for adventure, children of the spirit and the purse, and in such a swift, concentrated biography as Kaiser's From Morn to Midnight, such dramas of rebellion as Troller's Man and the Masses and the Machine were records, so different as they were from the external approaches to class conflicts of an earlier day like Hopman's The Weavers or Galsworthy's Strife. Such a saga of industrialism as Kaiser's Gas, or such a tragedy of secret yearnings as Heisenclaver's Beyond, where a man and woman speak freely to each other from the hidden language of the mind. The way was pointed to some of the uses to which Expressionism was later to be put. Now, Expressionism in France. Post-war France also felt the tidal wave of protest, the reaction against the old cliches of realism and naturalism. To a theatre that was as dead and sterile as that to which Antony had once brought the breath of life, came a new generation of playwrights, men like Pellerin, Gentalen, and Lenormand. Pellerin, who wrote Ted Ray Rechanges, in which a man lives for dinner as one individual, only to find on reaching its destination that he has separated into six different and distinct persons. Gentillon, Gantilon, who in Maya found a symbol for illusion in the person of Marcellus, prostitute, because she was a different woman to each man who sought her out, fashioned in the image of his particular need or desire, and Leonomand, who in the failure told with an unswerving directness the poignant story of the misfortunes which overtake a tentrate actress and her other husband who follows her on the run. Such instances picked at random from a crowded list are typical, nothing more. Not were France and Germany the only countries to react to the new tendencies. So we can see the influence or the arrival, advent of expressionism in France, in Germany, so also in Britain, and of course in America. And now we can see it, of course, many other European countries as well. Okay, say for example in Czechoslovakia and in Russia, and of course it comes to America. And in America, right, expressionism is just popularized by playwrights like Eugene O'Neill. So now we have to just conclude, of course, expressionism, how expressionism became very popular. Okay, so Regardless of the slim merits of many of the plays built in the image of expressionism, and even of the faults of monotony and obscurity, which often mar the best of them, these dramas come as tokens of revolt. So, expressionist dramas come as tokens of revolt. They too are attempts to throw down the old plastering that, as Hugo said, conceals the facade of art and must always conceal it for each new generation until it has found a medium of expression true to itself and native to its own time. They are attempts to break from the well made play. So, expressionistic drama is an attempt to break from the traditional well made play. Scribe established sallies against the naturalism for which Antoine fought. They speak from the mind of a new day, using its idiom, catching something of its rhythm, answering some of its needs, and following the pace it sets for them. These authors feel with Velona Pilcher that a show on stage should not be an imitation. Okay, so realism, naturalism is imitation, but expressionism is not imitation. So, as Velona Picture says, a show on the stage should not be an imitation, but an expression of experience, and that is expressionist plays. That is the Emperor John's. It's an expansion, or it is, of course, an expression of experience. That walls should not be built about a vision of life to keep in illusion if they keep out illumination. That dramatic speech should not be daily dialogue but something wonderfully different. That a miracle of mimicry is not worth an ounce of imagination. And finally, that theater of life of the 20th century cannot be confined behind a conventional fourth wall while the rest of the world is exploring the fourth dimension. So, the place of these dramatists, the expressionist dramatists, are not only tokens of protest but are symbols of vitality. For they at least show that the modern playwright who has lagged behind his theatrical co workers in pliancy and courage has awakened to experiment and shown a willingness to try to plant his flag on new dominions of his own discovery. And such they are hopeful symbols, encouraging portents that are not to be despised, because in its last analysis, the theater of each age is forever at the mercy of its playwrights. Only when their courage is high, their imagination unfettered, and the hot blood of protest is running through their veins, can its other artists be granted those opportunities which call for their best talents and give the theater that quality of being theater and being proud of the fact which is its one condition of glory. Now, of course, we have to move forward, and we are just looking at another very important theme, or rather, another important topic, that is, we are discussing Eugene O'Neill's contribution to American drama. Rather, we are discussing the chief characteristics of O'Neill's play. Okay, so this is very important. Everybody, please understand. Now we move on to, of course, another very important theme or another important topic, that is how Eugene O'Neill brought about revolution in American drama. How Eugene O'Neill brought about revolution in American drama. Similarly, or Eugene O'Neill as a dramatist, or even it can be the characteristics of O'Neill's plays. Okay, we begin the new discussion of the new topic, O'Neill's contribution right now. In the barren land of American drama, Eugene O'Neill grew a beautiful pasture land. is a meadow in the desert of American literature. Look at that. That is, Eugene O'Neill. Eugene O'Neill is a meadow in the desert of American literature. Till the First World War, no worthwhile play was written in America that had anything but immediate contemporary interest. From Thomas Godrey's Prince of Pathia of 1767 to Rachel Grother's He and She, the record of American drama shows no play of literary value or prospect of permanence. No dramatist of the stature of any European dramatists such as Strindberg or Maeterlinck and Hopeman had been produced by America. Eugene O'Neill's immediate predecessors, Clyde Fitch and Augustus Thomas, stuck only to the convention of the well-made play, and no fresh breeze blew. It was O'Neill who proved to be a chief insurgent against worn-out dramatic conventions and the romantically banal, and established himself as a symbol of a renaissance that paralleled on that paralleled okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. It was O'Neill who proved to be a chief insurgent against worn out dramatic conventions and the romantically banal, and established himself as a symbol of a renaissance that paralleled on the stage the so called renaissance in American drama. That is the significance of Eugene O'Neill. Okay, so O'Neill, as a pioneer American dramatist, contributed profusely and incomparably to the development of the new drama in United States of America. He is, in fact, a pioneer of American drama. He is a pioneer American dramatist. Before him, the American dramatists wrote farce, comedy, and melodrama. No greatly moving and powerful play was written before O'Neill. O'Neill wrote moving and powerful tragedies. His famous plays are The Hairy Ape, The Emperor Jones, Morning Becomes Electra, Strange Interlude, and The Iceman Cometh. His other important plays are Beyond Bound East for Carif, The Moon of the Caribbees, Beyond the Horizon, Anachrysty, All God's Children Got Wine, Desire Under the Ems, The Great God Brown, Our Wilderness, A Moon for the Misbegotten. Let's look at the themes of the plays of Eugene O'Neill. The themes of O'Neill's plays is man in relation to his society, his God and the universe. That is the theme. One of the themes is man in relation to his society, his God, and the universe. Man in relation to society, God, and universe. This is one of the themes. The theme of Strange Interlude is the breaking up of a woman's character because of the death of her lover in the war. The theme of Morning Becomes Electra is sex, death, and murder. It shows the consequences of the fulfillment of man's twisted desires. The Iceman Cometh is a modern morality play which makes use of ancient motif of the dance of death with its modern paradoxical twist of will, chance, and detested catastrophe, where each man kills the thing he loves because he cannot love enough. The theme of the hairy ape is man's belongingness. Broadly speaking, O'Neill's themes are man's frustration, failure, alienation, identity crisis, misery, lack of love, and understanding his dreams and aspirations. These are the general themes of the plays of Eugene or O'Neill. Now, we are discussing the very technical innovations of the great American playwright Eugene O'Neill. O'Neill experimented successfully with new techniques of drama. He is a major expressionistic dramatist of America. He blended naturalism, symbolism, and realism. Taking his lesson from Strindberg, he made use of expressionist style in his plays such as The Hairy Ape and The Emperor Jones. Obsessed as he was with the thought of the projecting inner life and metaphysical ideas, he searched endlessly for theatrical means of this. He used interior monologues, speech on different levels of consciousness, asides as in strange interlude, and introduced the mask for startling effects. This is again remarkable. He also made plays with the use of masks. He went to the extent of marking the part of his split protagonist in Days Without End, played by two actors. O'Neill also violated what John Gassner calls the sacred right of playgoer to discharge his obligations to the stage in 2 hours and a half theater attendance. His plays are of epic dimensions, and through these, O'Neill brought to the American theater a spacious place, which was, of course, known only to the Greek stage or to the very Aeschylean trilogy. Okay, so this is the great contribution of Eugene O'Neill. Now, Eugene O'Neill as a representative American dramatist. O'Neill is a unique representative dramatist of the United States of America. He is, to quote John Gassner, the height and breadth of the American theater. Find fault with O'Neill and you find fault with this entire American stage. Find merit in him, you find worth in its striving or straining towards significant drama. It is possible to single out American playwrights endowed with greater refinement and facility than can be attributed to him, but none who made a comparable impression on the 20th century, chiefly as a result of his persistent effort after 1918. The American drama actually ended the century and made contributions to world theater that could be considered significantly modern. So now we have, of course, the very concept of tragedy according to Eugene O'Neill. Rather, we are discussing Eugene O'Neill's conception of tragedy. Okay, so Eugene O'Neill, like T.S. Eliot, went to the Greeks for inspiration. The ills of life seemed to him for complex to express through photographic technique. He said, tragedy, I think, has the meaning the Greeks gave it. To them, it brought exaltation, an urge towards life and ever more life. Like the Greek writers such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, he saw humanity tortured and tormented in anguish. Like the great heroes of Shakespearean tragedies, his heroes also have tragic flaws as per Aristotle's definition of character. Like the plays of the Greeks, O'Neill's plays are serious moral plays. His protagonists are neurocratic. He has also a modern equivalent for the Greek concept of fate or gods. His deep study of Freud and Jung made him discover the modern equivalent of the gods in the unconscious. In the hairy ape, the unconscious occupies the position of a malignant fate, and Jung has to struggle with this and ultimately lose the fight. In the Greek drama, the struggle used to be between man and God. In the plays of O'Neill, the struggle is now with himself. Man owns past and future. In his foreword to the great God Brown, he states that the theater should give up what the church no longer gives us, a meaning. In brief, it should return to the spirit of Greek grandeur. And if we have no gods or heroes to portray, we have the subconscious, the mother of all gods and heroes. So according to Eugene O'Neill, the mother of all gods and heroes is the subconscious. To O'Neill, God, fate, mystery are all aspects of the subconscious and of the struggle of the conscious will to assert itself against the unconscious will. Okay, so that is a very good fact and idea we get from Eugene O'Neill. So this is very important. To O'Neill, God, fate, mystery are all aspects of the subconscious. Now we have to discuss how Eugene represents life. And maybe in some other place of Eugene O'Neill, we can see a celebration of life. So now we are looking at that aspect of the place of Eugene O'Neill. Celebration of life in the place of Eugene O'Neill. O'Neill conceived tragedy as something that celebrates life. Tragedy, what is tragedy? Tragedy is something that celebrates life. So Eugene O'Neill says, life in itself is nothing. It is the dream that keeps us fighting, willing, living. In his place, O'Neill has tried to work out this celebration of life. This was Nietzsche's view, and O'Neill agreed with Nietzsche. The death of the hero must reveal the dignity, nobility, and universality of his struggle, even though from the beginning the struggle has been a futile one. That is true in the case of Emperor John's as well. In Greek tragedies, the order is symbolized in fate or the gods. In Shakespeare, it is the laws of nature, or in human justice or reason. The hero flouts this order on the stage by his action. He dramatizes his struggle, and with his destruction, the order is restored. In the place of O'Neill, the violated order is that of the mind. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of O'Neill's tragedies, is exploration of the mind as a domain of intense tragic potentiality. O'Neill was doing in drama what the novelists of stream of consciousness technique were doing in the field of fiction. Now we move on to the discussion of the tragic heroes of Eugene O'Neill. O'Neill's tragic heroes are modeled on the ideas of Freud and Jung. They are the modern equivalents of the gods. Their actions proceed from the collective unconsciousness. Pride is responsible for their tragedy. As they rely too much on their consciousness, their conscious ego, ignoring the tremendous power of the unconscious, this unconscious is equivalent to Greek gods. Now we are just discussing the motive of the place of Eugene O'Neill. The motive of the place of Eugene O'Neill, that is the next topic. Let us discuss that. The motive of the place of Eugene O'Neill. O'Neill's vision of life was essentially tragic. Okay, we move on to discuss the discussion of O'Neill's vision of motive. The motive in Eugene O'Neill's place. I just want to drink some water. I'm sorry. I'll begin that topic after having a sip of water. Bit tired. Sorry for the trouble. Sorry for the interruption. Just 1 second. Okay, I continue. Maybe I shall have a cup of water very soon. Yeah, it's here. Thank you. We will continue 1 second. O'Neill's vision of life was essentially tragic. He saw humanity tortured and tormented and endlessly tragic. He saw humanity tortured and tormented and endlessly suffering. His plays, therefore, are attempts to explain human suffering and something to justify it. The result is not irony, but the classic twofold justification of the ways of God or fate to man. First, that suffering and the very need to explain and symbolize it are the fountainhead of human action and creativity. And second, that fated though he may be, man is ultimately a free and responsible agent who brings most of his grief upon himself through pride. This is the view of Doris V. Falk about O'Neill's plays. The ethics or moral purpose of O'Neill's tragic plays or tragic protagonists is to keep up an illusion about themselves that is deep rooted in them. This moral purpose exists side by side with something that is directly its opposite, namely a desire to discover themselves. Often the protagonist of O'Neill unconsciously hates and rejects his real self and in its place substitutes a false self-image. This self-hatred and the consequent pursuit of illusion constitute the tragic flow of the very protagonist. And this tragic flow destroys the hero. Sometimes neurotic pride is the cause of the hero's fall. Look at the hairy ape. Look at Emma Jones. You can see neurotic pride is the root or it is the cause of their tragedy. And for example, there would have been no downfall for Nina of Strange Interlude and for Lavinia of Morning Becomes Electra. This is also due to the impact of the Greek tragedy on Eugene O'Neill. Now we have to just discuss another very important issue in the place of Eugene O'Neill, that is the blending of symbolism and expressionism, the incorporation of symbolism and expressionism in the place of Eugene O'Neill. In fact, O'Neill got tired of realism, and now that he is tired of realism, he just shifted to expressionism and symbolism. Okay, so O'Neill turned to symbolism and expressionism because he is tired of the realistic drama, and he just began a revolution in theater. That is, of course, the American theater. The Emperor Jones, the Hairy Ape, and the Great God Brown are the great results of these experiments. That is the symbolist and expressionistic experiments of Eugene O'Neill. And these plays caused O'Neill's inclusion in the group of the avant-garde dramatists. But O'Neill was not inclined to uphold symbolism and expressionism in all his plays. He was unwilling to be the captive of expressionism in all his plays. Okay, so he was rather reluctant to follow one pattern. So we cannot say that he is just following expressionistic dramas or symbolist dramas. He has attempted all sorts of plays, like he was a realist. He practiced realistic plays, naturalistic plays, symbolist plays, of course, expressionist plays, biblical themes, Greek dramas. All this he practiced. So we cannot just limit himself to, or rather, a single style. After expressionism and symbolism, O'Neill's attention turned to a vaster and more fantastic patterns, for he was not restrained by practical considerations. Thus, O'Neill boldly went on to, of course, very, very mammoth dramatic compositions as Lazarus Laughed, Strange Interlude, Morning Becomes Electra, etc. And now we just look at the very vision of life that is seen in the place of Eugene O'Neill. And when we look at the vision of life in the place of Eugene O'Neill, we understand that it is a very gloomy, terrifying vision of life. We have a gloomy, terrifying vision of life in the place of Eugene O'Neill, and we are discussing the very gloomy, terrifying vision of life in the place of Eugene O'Neill very soon now. O'Neill's preoccupation with death and gloom makes him akin of Webster and Ford, the prominent Jacobean dramatists. O'Neill broods over death, and there is in him a susceptibility to extremes of passion, will, and affliction that one discerns in the Jacobeans. The ingredients of O'Neill's drama have been nearly summed up by Sinclair Lewis, the novelist, during his Nobel Prize address to the Swedish Academy. I'm quoting Sinclair Lewis. And had you chosen Eugene O'Neill, who has done nothing much in the American drama, save to transform it utterly in 10 or 12 years from a false world of neat and competent trickery into a world of splendor, feat, and greatness, you would have been reminded that he had done something not to be nearly arranged in a study, but a terrifying, magnificent, and often quite horrible, a thing akin to a tornado, an earthquake, or a devastating fire. It is O'Neill's vision of life as something terrifying and magnificent and often quite horrible that makes his tragedy so powerfully moving. So, the vision of life in the place of Eugene O'Neill is gloomy and terrifying. And it is because of that reason that the spectators and the readers are often moved by the place of Eugene O'Neill. Now we come to the next topic, that is influence of psychology in the place of Eugene O'Neill. To this gloomy, terrifying new vision or view of life that Eugene O'Neill cherished the added profound knowledge of psychology. The influence of Freud on O'Neill has been greatly deep. It is obvious in The Strange Interlude and Morning Becomes Electra that O'Neill is said to have remarked that too much Freudianism was read into the latter play. O'Neill employs in his dramas the Oedipus complex and Electra complex that have been much discussed after Freud's analysis of these. In The Iceman Cometh, there is some other Freudian idea acting as the vital psychological factor, the death wish. O'Neill has made a remarkable attempt to dramatize subconscious emotions. The terminology of psychoanalysis frequently figures in the course of discussions in his plays. John Howard, thank you, Parama, thanks for your comment. You are really inspiring me. It is just encouraging to, of course, view your comment. Thank you very much. So the terminology of psychoanalysis frequently figures in the course of the discussions in his plays. John Howard Lawson discusses O'Neill and his treatment of psychology. Thus, psychoanalysis as a method of psychological investigation has no bearing on O'Neill's plays. His interest in character is metaphysical rather than psychological. His attempts, or rather, he attempts a complete escape from reality. He tries to sever contact with the world by setting up an inner kingdom which is emotionally, spiritually independent. From Freud, O'Neill also made use of the idea of flight to the past. Many of his characters love to linger over the past to get back their past childhood. Emotion in the place of O'Neill is recognized as a vital force, but it is always an emotional drive based on the father-daughter mother-son relationship. His use of the Freudian formula serves to negate any conscious struggle on the part of his characters. A passion is necessarily evil because it is incestuous, yet it is unavoidable because it is the condition upon which they are born. His characters are emotional but sterile. In no single drama of O'Neill do we get an intense love relationship between man and woman, which is creative or satisfying. Lavinia's story in Morning becomes Electra, and Nina's pathetic fate in Strange Interlude illustrate these truths. Emotion, thus, in the place of O'Neill, is something negative working towards the destruction of man. Thus, O'Neill gives a psychological interrelation to the question of fate that looms large in Greek tragedies. Fate is interpreted by O'Neill as something neither entirely within man nor altogether outside him. It's both in man and outside him. It works relentlessly towards his destruction. It paralyzes his will and his emotions betray him. Thus, Greek idea of fate is transformed by O'Neill just as the avenging furies of the Oresteia trilogy undergo a psychological reinterpretation in Morning Becomes Electra. Now we have to discuss O'Neill's concern with illusion. We have, of course, many Eugene O'Neill plays in which illusion is again a very important element. So let us discuss O'Neill's concern with illusion right now. Another idea that haunted O'Neill, the playwright, and one which has appeared in his plays repeatedly and in various guises is that of man's illusions. Helen Muchnick throws light on this aspect of O'Neill in a comparative study of O'Neill's and Gorky's plays entitled Sir's Swing Plays by Gorky and O'Neill. Always concerned with illusion, O'Neill has presented it in many ways in pictures of individuals pathetically or tragically frustrated because of some initial mistake they make about themselves or that other make about them, as in Bound East for Cardiff, Before Breakfast, The Rape Beyond the Horizon, in symbols not of individuals but of man overwhelmed by the force of unconscious primitivism latent in him, as in the Emperor John's and in the Harry VIII, in parables concerning the ethics of Western civilization, as in the Fountain, Marco Millon's Lazarus Laughed, in psychological probings of man's soul, as in Desire Under the Ems, The Great God Brown, Strange Interlude, and Morning Becomes Electra. Despite great variations in focus and interest, certain factors remain constant enough throughout the plays of Eugene O'Neill to make it appear a continuous philosophic investigation of the riddle of falsehood at the core of life, in the process of which several partial solutions have been reached, but no definitive one as yet. Now, we just end our general discussion, and I have, of course, some recommendation or suggested readings, and I'm asking maybe students, UG and PG students, to go for a reading of some of the titles. Of course, critical works on Eugene O'Neill. The first one is a work by Doris Alexander, the critic. Doris Alexander's title, The Tempering of Eugene O'Neill, is a very good work, and it has, of course, some chapters on the Emperor John's, so also some chapters on other plays of Eugene O'Neill, which are expressionistic, and this play, The Tempering of Eugene O'Neill, is, of course, a very good text title on the place of Eugene O'Neill. Please read Doris Alexander, Doris D-O-R-I-S, D-O-R-I-S, Alexander, Alexander, The Tampering of Eugene O'Neill. Another very important title is Frederick Carpenter's, Frederick, Frederic, Carpenter, normal Carpenter, spelling Frederick Carpenter. The title is Eugene O'Neill. Another very good work is, I mentioned it in the previous live streaming session, that is B.H. Clarke, Eugene O'Neill, The Man and His Place. Another very good work is Oscar Cargill and others. It's in fact an edited work. The title is O'Neill and His Place. Please read O'Neill and His Place, the title by Oscar Cargill and other editors. Another very important title is Edwin Engels, The Haunted Heroes of Eugene O'Neill. Another very good title is John Gassner, O'Neill, a collection of critical essays. Okay, now we have another title, The Melodramas of O'Neill. The Melodramas of O'Neill by Virgil Geddes. Now another one is by Joseph Wood Kruth, The American Drama Since 1918. Very good title, The American Drama Since 1918. It is by Joseph Wood Kruth. Now we have S.K. Winther's Eugene O'Neill, A Critical Study. Good work. Now another one is Joseph T. Sipley, S-I-P-L-E-Y, The Art of O'Neill. Very good title. Now another one is, Robert Brustein. The title is The Theatre of Revolt. It is a very important book, The Theatre of Revolt, about expressionism and of course very modern developments in world drama, American drama. Of course, Theatre of Revolt, published from Boston in the year 1964 by Robert Brustein. Please read. Now we come to another some very important questions. That is of course textual questions. Okay, so let us look at some of the important textual questions. Like the first question is, I will just read out the questions. Of course, I'm not giving the answers now that we have some shortage of time. Some of the important questions, right? So the question is, of course, write a short note on Eugene O'Neill life and career. Another question, write short note on autobiographical element in O'Neill's place. Very important question. Autobiographical elements in the place of O'Neill. Another question is, write a short note on O'Neill's art of plot construction. I discussed it in the previous session. Another one is, write a short note on O'Neill's realism in the place of Eugene O'Neill. Another one is, write a short note on O'Neill's symbolism, Eugene O'Neill's symbolism. Very important question. Another one is O'Neill's expressionism. Another one is a short note on O'Neill's heroes and heroines. So when you get a question like O'Neill's heroes and heroines, you don't have to write about all the heroes and heroines. You just have to write about maybe the heroes and heroines of one or two plays of Eugene O'Neill. Now another important question is, Eugene O'Neill as a great tragic artist. Very important question. O'Neill as a very important tragic artist. That is a very important question. Now another important question is the technique of Eugene O'Neill. That is the dramatic technique of Eugene O'Neill. Okay, now we have yet another very important question, that is do you think O'Neill is concerned about man's destiny and about the modern world. Very important question. And this question is applicable in the case of the hairy ape, the Emperor John's, because both the plays deal with modern man and the modern world, civilization, industrialization, capitalism, conflict between bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Okay, so do you think O'Neill is concerned about man's destiny and about the modern world? Another very important question. Okay, now we have a very important question, that is, okay, write a short note on O'Neill's receptivity of the various influences of his age. Another question, write the synopsis of the play The Emperor John's. Another question is, what are the themes in the Emperor John's? Very important question. What are the themes in the Emperor John's? Another important question is, shown out on the plot construction of the Emperor John's. Then a title of the Emperor John's. Very important question. Title of the Emperor John's. Now another question is it is of course textual, a very textual question, that is the character of Brutus Jones. Okay, the character of Brutus Jones. All right, very important question. The character of Brutus Jones. And another question is, okay, write a short note on Henry Smithers. Again, another very important question. Character of Henry Smithers. Okay, now we have another very important question, that is symbolism in the Emperor John's. Then shown down on the importance of the tom-tom, importance of the tom-tom. Okay, now with that we come to the end of the discussion of the play The Emperor John's. Okay, yeah, I will of course give you of course two more. Right, one is of course a character sketch. Here I will give you, this will of course help you, so I'm just giving you one more lecture, that is the character of Brutus Jones, character of Emperor Jones or Brutus Jones. First, Brutus Jones as a symbol of every man. Brutus Jones is the central figure in the Emperor Jones. As its name signifies, he is every man. He represents the brute or animal instincts in the common man on the one hand and the instinct to possess on the other. He demonstrates by his doing that a man may be a king or a beggar. He is dominated by the same animal instincts and impulses. He is thus a type and a symbol. But at the same time, he is individual because he is different from all characters in the drama, and also because he has a distinct personality and role. Now, the personality of Brutus Jones. In the very opening scene of the play, the personality of Emperor Jones has been described in detail. We are told that he is tall, powerfully built, full-blooded Negro of middle age. His features are typically negroid. At the same time, he is also strong-willed, hardy, self-reliant, confident. His eyes are alive with a keen, cunning intelligence. His pants are bright red, scarlet, with a light blue strip down the side. Patent leather-laced boots with brass spurs, and a belt with long-barreled pearl-handled revolver in a holster complete his makeup. In manner, he is shrewd, suspicious, evasive. He wears a light blue uniform coat sprayed. His gaudy dress is symbolic of savage fondness for very, very strong, gaudy colors. But he is so majestic and stately, in his manners that his gaudy dress does not make him look ridiculous. He has a way of carrying it off which is distinctive and unique. Now, John's role in the play. John's is the hero of the play. He is the potter who becomes the emperor by sheer tact and ambition to rise and be powerful. Henry Smithers, a Cockney adventurer, learned from a Negro woman that the followers of Brutus Jones, self styled emperor of a West Indian island, were about to desert their ruler. With Smithers' help, Jones, former Pullman porter and jailbreaker, had duped the natives into believing he was a magician. He has some divine power. The superstitious natives made him emperor of the island. Smithers disclosed to the emperor the disaffection of his subjects who had been taxed and cheated by him beyond human endurance. Jones had judged that he had 6 more months of power before the natives caught on to his skullduggery. He had a silver bullet cast for a good luck charm. Besides, the bullet might be useful if he were ever caught by his subjects. At Smithers' suggestion, Jones rang a bell for his attendants. No one appeared. Jones resigned his position as emperor on the spot and made immediate plans to escape through the jungle to the coast. Drums began to beat in the hills. The ex-emperor gave the palace to Smithers, took up his Panama hat, and walked boldly out the front door. At the edge of the jungle, Brutus Jones searched unsuccessfully for tinned food he had kept for such an emergency. The drums continued to beat louder and louder and more insistent. Night fell, and formless fears came out of the jungle to beset Jones. The moon rose. Jones came into a clearing, and there in the moonlight he saw Jeff, a Pullman porter he thought he had killed in a razor duel. Jeff was throwing dice. When the kneeling figure refused to answer him, Jones shot at him. The phantom disappeared. Drums still thudded in the distance. Jones, now sick with fright, plunged into the inky jungle. After a while, he came upon a road and paused to rest. A chain gang came out of the forest. The guard of the gate motioned to Jones to take his place in the gang and get to work. When the guard whipped him, Jones lifted his shovel to strike him, but he discovered that he actually had no shovel. In his rage of fear and frustration, he fired his revolver at the guard. The rod, the guard, and the chain gang disappeared. The jungle closed in. The louder beat of tom-tom drove Jones on his frantic circles. Now in tatters, the terrified and exhausted Jones repented the murders he had committed and the way he had cheated the islanders. He came next upon a slave auction attended by whites dressed in the costumes of 1950s. An auctioneer put Jones on the auction block. Frightened, Jones shattered this apparition by firing one shot at the auctioneer and another at a planter. He dashed into the forest, mad with fear. The drums continued to beat. At 3 o'clock, Jones came to a part of the jungle which strangely resembled the hold of a slave ship. He found himself one of a cargo of slaves who was swaying slowly with the motion of the ship. Johns and the other slaves mourned with sorrow at being taken away from their homeland. Having only the silver bullet left in his revolver, John saved it and dashed on again into the back of the night, into the black of the night. Next, he came upon an altar like arrangement of boulders or boulders near great river. He sank to his knees as if to worship. A Congo witch doctor appeared from behind a large tree and began a primitive dance. Johns was hypnotized by the ritual. The witch doctor indicated to Johns in pantomime that the ex emperor must offer himself as a sacrifice in order to overcome the forces of evil. A great green eyed crocodile emerged from the river. Johns fired the silver bullet at the monster, and the witch doctor disappeared behind a tree, leaving Johns lying on the ground, completely overcome with fear. At dawn, Lem, the leader of the rebels, came with Smithers and a group of natives to the edge of the jungle where Johns had entered the night before. Lem had been delayed in pursuing Johns because of the necessity of manufacturing silver bullets, which Lem believed were the only means of taking John's life. Several of Lem's men entered the jungle. They soon found the prostrate Johns who had run in circles all the night. One shot him through the chest with a silver bullet. John's body was brought back to Lem, who thought that the silver bullet was what had really killed John's. But Smithers, looking at Brutus John's fear contoured face, knew differently. The past of Brutus Johns. Brutus Johns is an ex Pullman porter, a murderer, and an escaped convict. He worked for 10 years in the humble position of a porter. In a fit of uncontrolled rage, he murdered another Jeff for cheating him at the game dice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but made good his escape from the jail by killing the prison guard. He reached an island of the West Indies, and within 2 years, by virtue of his cunning and superior intelligence, he became the emperor of the island. As a Pullman porter, he had listened to the conversation of the whites, acquired a knowledge of their crooked ways and dishonest dealings, and used that knowledge effectively to subdue the natives and rule over them. His shrewdness. Jones is very clever, and we discussed the intelligence and the shrewdness of Emperor Jones. Emperor Jones is exceptionally shrewd and crafty. He's also self confident, bold, and determined. His mental level is much higher than that of the other Negroes, who are lazy, ignorant, servile, and superstitious. Jones is easily able to befool them and subdue them and extort money from them. He's a crook and he robs the natives without any scruple. As he tells me this, the white trader and smuggler, he is a big thief, but for little stealing, one may be imprisonment. One may be imprisoned, but for big stealing, one may be made an emperor. Now we look at the cunningness and tyranny of Brutus Jones. Yes, Emperor Jones or Brutus Jones, cunningness and tyranny. Jones is very cunning fellow. He cunningly He cunningly plays with the blind faith of the common men and women of the island and exploits them, believing that the natives will never get silver anywhere in the island. Pour water from the flask. Believing that the natives will never get silver anywhere in the island, he has spread a rumor that he can be killed only by a silver bullet. They believed it to be true, and Jones is able to govern them like an autocrat. He knows how to befool the natives, learning their language and teaching them elementary English have been a part of his foul tactics. Now we discuss the greed of Emperor Jones. Emperor Jones lusts for wealth. Jones has all the evils of an average American. He lusts for money and has amassed huge wealth in a foreign bank on which he hopes to live comfortably for the rest of his life. He knows that the emperor game will soon come to an end, and then he will run away to the safety of that foreign country and the enjoyment of his wealth. He says to Smithers, "You didn't suppose I was holding down this emperor's job for the glory in it, did you? They want the big circus show for their money. I gives it to them and I gets the money." Okay, now we discuss the prudent and far-sighted Emperor John's prudence and the far-sightedness in Emperor John's. Emperor John's is far-sighted enough to realize that his days as an emperor would soon come to an end. And so he has planned his escape with great care and foresight. He has buried food under a white stone on the edge of the great forest and has well familiarized himself with the route to the sea coast. When he learns that his guards, generals, cabinet ministers, and all the natives have gone on the hills, he leaves his palace and runs away. He is also a practical man of the world. He considers everything from the utilitarian point of view. As we have already noted, he is not fascinated by the outward glamour of kingship, but uses it to extort money from the natives because he knows that money is the key to the enjoyment of life. He is bold and self confident too. Now, the degeneration and fall of Emperor Jones. At last, Brutus Jones or Emperor Jones is tired and hungry, and incessant beating of the tom tom gets on his nerves. He fails to find his food, is apprehensive that the natives have stolen it, and this means that they have foreknowledge of his plans. His inner terror makes him see the little forms of nameless fears, and he shoots at them. He passes through a process of regression and disintegration. In the end, he becomes a primitive Negro wearing only a loincloth. This physical regression goes hand in hand with the spiritual disintegration. Visions from his personal unconscious strike terror into his soul, and these are followed by visions from his collective racial unconscious. Each vision disappears when he shoots at it, and each of the illusions leaves him more terror stricken, more nervous than before. By the end, he is nervous and is killed by a silver bullet. Thus, he comes to his tragic end. Pride and overconfidence are the tragic flaws in his character, and they cause his downfall, disintegration, and death. He has always been contemptuous of his own laws and also contemptuous of the natives over whom he ruled and from whom he extorted his huge wealth. He considers himself superior to Smithers and the natives. Success has made him overconfident and proud and arrogant, and these flaws destroy him. Okay, now we discuss the character of Henry Smithers. That is again very textual question. Discuss the character of Henry Smithers. Henry Smithers is a Cockney London trader who carries on his business in the island which John's is the emperor. He makes his appearance only twice. He is a foil and contrast to John's. This contrast is both in body and spirit. Smithers is a white man. Johns is black and negro. Smithers is tall fellow in comparison to the short stature of Johns. Smithers is a cowardly and mean fellow and does not have the bold and adventurous spirit of Johns. He is a traitor too. It is Smithers who gives the natives the knowledge of the emperor's escape route. He helps the natives to locate Johns and is pleased at his death. Smithers remarks mockingly, "Where are your high and mighty airs now, your blooming majesty?" Smithers is a tall man, round shouldered, about 40. His bald head, perched on a long neck with an enormous Adam's apple, looks like an egg. The tropics have tanned his naturally pasty face with its small, sharp features to a sickly yellow, and native rum has painted his pointed nose to a startling red. His little washy blue eyes are red rimmed and dart about him like a ferret's. His expression is one of unscrupulous meanness, cowardly and dangerous. He is dressed in a worn riding suit of dirty white drill, puttees, spurs, and wears a white cork helmet. A cutted belt with an automatic revolver is around his waist. He carries a riding whip in his hand. Johns is a cowardly and mean creature. While Johns has something majestic and distinctive about him, Smithers is gaudy in dress and looks ridiculous. He is secretive and mean, whereas Johns is open and frank. Smithers fails to inspire respect, he is a petty thief. Smithers is jealous of Johns and derives a malignant satisfaction from his discomfiture. When Johns reached the island of which he is now the emperor, Smithers has helped him in various ways. Johns was more crafty, shrewd, and tactful, and so from a humble stowaway he rose to the emperor within 2 years. This has made Smithers jealous of him. He is afraid of the emperor, pretends to be his friend, but in reality, as scene one amply makes it clear, harbors enmity and ill will towards Brutus Jones. Smithers is a hypocrite who smiles and frowns to hide his real feeling. When he comes to know that Negroes are in revolt against Johns, he comes to the palace to enjoy the discomfiture of the emperor. He reports the bad news with a malicious leer, all the time pretending to be a friend and well wisher. He does not dare insult Johns to his face, though the evident expression of dignified self confidence of John's face irritates him. Deep within his heart, he is very much pleased at the revolt and intends harming him as much as possible. But outwardly, he is all courtesy and admiration for John's and pretends to help him even at this juncture. His greed becomes evident the moment Johns leaves the palace, telling him that he is free to take away anything from there. As he examines the palace, his eyes brighten up with the satisfaction of a pretty thief to see the goods which are his now. Smithers is thus cunning and very, very treacherous. Okay, with this we come to the end of Eugene O'Neill and the play The Emperor Johns. So you can see a playlist for MA English students, and in that playlist I have made a lot of lectures on Eugene O'Neill, a lot of lectures on Emperor Johns. I have read out the play, I've explained the play, I have read out and gave answers to the questions and discussed all the themes and topics like modern American drama, major plays of O'Neill, autobiographical elements in O'Neill's plays, O'Neill's art of plot construction, O'Neill's art of characterization, realism, symbolism, expressionism, then tragic vision, O'Neill's contribution, then again, of course, the play summary of The Emperor Johns, title of the play The Emperor Johns, then of course themes in The Emperor Johns, then of course the collective unconscious in Emperor Johns, use of the interior monologue in The Emperor Johns, symbolism, then importance of the tom-tom, critics on The Emperor Johns, important books on Eugene O'Neill and The Emperor Johns, then a word by word reading of the play, and of course character sketches of Brutus Johns and Henry Smithers. All this we discussed, and with that we come to the end of the discussion of Eugene O'Neill. Now in the next live streaming I'll be discussing the poetry of Walt Whitman. I'll be just Walt Whitman. Remember some of the plays of Walt Whitman, some of the poems of Walt Whitman are prescribed for detailed study. So I'll be giving you a very good introduction on the biographical and the poetry, biography as well as poetry of Walt Whitman. Thereafter, I'll be just looking at some of the poetry of Walt Whitman, especially the poem, the very masterpiece of Walt Whitman, that is A Passage to India. It's a long poem, a very important poem. It is prescribed for detailed study. So it is good that all of you join me in the live streaming session. You can text me, you can just write comments. You can even send me your queries. You can WhatsApp me your doubts and all when we discuss Walt Whitman. Okay, so with that we come to the end of today's live streaming session. In fact, we have discussed more than 2 hours, and thank you very much for the support. Thanks a lot for joining me. Thanks a lot for the likes and comments and all your encouragement. Next day, please join. We are discussing Walt Whitman and A Passage to India by Walt Whitman, one of the very significant poems of Walt Whitman. Thank you so much. Be happy and hopeful. May God bless you all. Good night. Bye-bye.